Well, happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
Yeah, we get really jazzed about Easter at One Church because Easter is a time where we're very intentional about celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. And the resurrection of Jesus for us today, for some, it may feel like old news. You know, like, well, yeah, that happened 2,000 years ago, and it's talked about at least once a year since then at Easter time, and you've heard it again and again and again. But remember, it's news. And the first Easter, man, it was really big news. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, this was a surprise. And I think that's one of my favorite parts about Easter is that Easter can really be a super sweet surprise, like a really cool surprise. And I'm praying that you will be surprised by Jesus in a very pleasant way this Easter, in a really sweet and powerful, pleasant way by Jesus this Easter, because that's what Jesus does. When he shows up, he surprises. I think back, into the creation. Jesus is the one who spoke everything into existence. And in the book of Genesis, at the front of the Bible, the very first words, it says, "In the beginning, God spoke." And Jesus spoke everything into existence. I mean, you want to talk about a surprise. There was nothing. The void was surprised. When Jesus said, "Let there be light," and there was light, it was like, man, Jesus came out with a bang, a giant surprise party of life. And he just keeps surprising us ever since then. You ever think about his birth? Well, that was a bit of a shocker. I mean, especially for Mary and Joseph. I mean, Mary's like, angels say, "What? How can this be? How can I be pregnant since I'm a virgin?" And then she's got to tell Joseph, and Joseph's like, Mary, say, "What?" And the surprises just keep on coming. And then Jesus is born in this town called Bethlehem, and he was laid in a manger, and this was just not what they were expecting, the Messiah to come like this and to be born like that. And then Jesus' whole life, his time here on earth, it was surprise after surprise after surprise. I mean, the miracles were pretty big surprises. They were not commonplace, unlike you may have thought. Like maybe think back in Bible times, people were just walking around on water for fun. That's just what they did. It's like, hey, let's go to the lake and walk on the water. No, nobody had ever walked on water before. When Jesus came out walking on the water, his friends were surprised. And boy, they were relieved when they found out that it was Jesus. The healings were a surprise because when people were sick or were lame or were blind or were ostracized from the community because of infectious diseases, then there was no hope for them. And then Jesus comes in as a healer. And people were very surprised by this. When Jesus fed 5,000 people with just a few loaves of bread and some fish, they were very surprised that he could provide in this way so supernaturally. And Jesus is full of surprises. When Jesus spoke, his words were very, very surprising. He said things like, you know what, when somebody wrongs you, if they slap you on one cheek, you should turn to them the other cheek also. What? Those are surprising words. He says, if somebody forces you to go 1 mile, if you're being oppressed and you're being forced to do something against your will by an oppressor, he says, don't just go the 1 and be joyful about it, but go ahead and go an extra mile as well. Jesus said to forgive, not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. He says, just forgive and forgive and forgive. And Jesus' words and his teaching were so surprising. He said, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God. The second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. The two go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. He's saying love is the most important thing. And then he says, a new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. Jesus was love personified, God in flesh. Heaven came down. And the way he lived was love personified. And we can look at his life and it's surprise after surprise. Even the people Jesus hung out with, that was a bit of a shocker. Because here's the thing, Jesus hung out with everyone. And I love that about him. He hung out with religious people who were getting it all mixed up and confusing others about the nature of God. But Jesus still hung out with them because he loved them. And he hung out with people who were considered to be far from God, the outcasts and the sinners and the prostitutes and the tax collectors. Jesus would hang out with everyone. And this is a message that he has for us, that God is for us. For God so loved the world that he would send his son, Jesus, for us. And so this may be a bit of a surprise for you, and I hope it is good news, and it's new, and it's fresh for your ears today. God is for you. God is for you. In fact, can you say that out loud? God is for me. Try that. God is for me. Yes. Try it again. Say it a little louder. God is for me. Yes. God is for me, and he's demonstrated this to us by Jesus coming and taking the very nature of a servant and laying down his life and not considering this equality he had with the Father, being God himself, as something to be held on to, but he emptied himself and became nothing and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. This is what he came to do. God is for you, not against you, and God is madly, passionately, head over heels in love with you, no matter who you are. No matter what you've done, no matter what anybody's ever done to you, no matter what anybody's ever said. Our God is for you, pro you. And this is the message of Easter. That's why we get excited about Easter. Now, we live in a world where hopefully this will be really good news, because just like there was a void in the beginning and Jesus spoke and said, let there be light, and there was light, and boom, there was, all right? This is still what we're in. You ever feel like we're living in a dark world? You ever look around and you go, it feels a little dark? I watched the news the other day. It felt a little dark. I jumped on social media the other day. It felt a little dark. I overheard a conversation about some people were having, and they were talking about politics. And you know what it felt like? A little dark. And here's good news. Jesus is still showing up in the darkness. And one of the darkest things that any of us can experience is the reality of death. Death is a reality. Our physical bodies decay and break down and die. And the darkness of death can kind of hang over us and cause great fear and worry because we have a wrong idea in our minds. This wrong idea is this. We think that death is the end. This is a wrong idea. We think that death is the end. And even if we know the truth about Jesus and we understand the resurrection, still we drift back into this kind of wrong thought process that said, no, death is the end. And we forget that Jesus has conquered death. He's defeated death. What Jesus did when he went to the cross was he laid down his life, and he was a sacrifice for us, receiving in himself my sin and your sin, the sin of all humankind. He brought it inside of himself. The things I've done and the things done to me, the things you've done and the things done to you, the things that we can't handle on our own. We don't know what to do with them because they're death. And we don't know what to do with death because we think death is the end. And so this death that separates us from God, our perfect God, and the imperfection that is in us, sin is anything we do that we know God doesn't want us to do, or anything we neglect to do that we know God does want us to do. And so our sins separate us from God, but God wants us to be with him. So he has made a way through his son Jesus, and Jesus came to deal with our sin. The thing we can't do ourselves, but not just ours, also the things that have happened to us. Because there's so many things that have happened to us, and those things are real. The pains, the scars, the wounds, the baggage that we're dragging along that is slowing us down, all this death that we keep carrying, Jesus took care of that on the cross. And this is the good news. This is our hope. Death is not the end. Because Jesus put to death in his body all of that sin, and it was buried with him in the tomb. And on the third day, Jesus rose. Woo-hoo. And he conquered sin and death. Jesus rose victorious over death, and all that sin and death stayed buried in the grave. And this is the hope that we have. But when there's death, sometimes it feels like the end. So maybe you've blown it, and you've blown it big, and you know you've blown it big, and you're carrying all that shame and all that guilt and all that doubt and all that fear and all that worry and all that anxiety. Jesus just might surprise you right now. Or maybe somebody has really blown it with you. I mean big time. And you're carrying around those wounds and those scars and that pain, and it is weighing you down, and you don't know what to do with it. Well, Jesus just might surprise you. Jesus' disciples, when Jesus died on the cross, they didn't know what to do. And then on the third day, they started hearing, some of the women had gone to the tomb and found that Jesus wasn't there and encountered an angel. And they'd gone back and said, the angel said he's not there, that he's risen. And then Peter and John, two of the disciples, they ran to the tomb to find out what was going on. And they discovered that Jesus had risen from the grave. Well, there were a couple of guys who were actually out on the road leaving Jerusalem. They had been in Jerusalem, followers of Jesus, but now they're leaving Jerusalem, going to this place called Emmaus. So this is Easter Sunday, Luke chapter 24, beginning in verse 13. It says, now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. And as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked with them. But they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, what are you discussing as you were walking along? They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened in these days? What things, he asked. About Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. He was a prophet, powerful in word and in deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of the women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find the body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus. Okay, now this is a surprising moment. These guys are getting out of Jerusalem. They're talking about everything they've experienced. And this is the first episode of Undercover Boss. They don't know their guy's walking with them. But they're being great to him. I mean, they're like, hey, yeah, you can walk with us. And Jesus says to them, hey, what are you guys talking about while you're walking? And they look at him and they're like, are you like the only person in Jerusalem who isn't aware of what's been going on with Jesus of Nazareth? It's like one of them was like almost looking at him going like, what, were you living under a rock? And Jesus is like, no, actually, I was dead under a rock. Are you the only one? You see, they had hoped. They had hope, but now their hope was dead. And when hope is dead, then despair is all you can see. When hope is dead, then despair is all you can see. Maybe in your life right now, you've lost hope. You've lost hope in your marriage, and death is all you can see. You've lost hope with your job, and death is all you can see. You've lost hope with your health, and death is all you can see. You've lost hope in your relationships, and death is all you can see. And when death is all we can see, it's dark, and there's despair. But Jesus, he loves to surprise us. Maybe, just maybe this Easter, right now, maybe you'll get a really sweet and pleasant surprise from Jesus. See, there's some common sources of despair. There's our broken expectations. Things aren't the way we thought they'd be. They didn't go the way we hoped they would. They thought Jesus would be some kind of military king who would take hold of the government and fix everything and take care of all the bad stuff the Romans were doing to them and give them back their nation and their people, and that they would get to rule with them in this way. And that's not what he did. Sometimes we experience despair because of brazen injustice. Just things are wrong. Like they're like our own people, our chief priests handed him over to be crucified. He was a prophet who spoke the very words of God and did miracles, and yet they handed him over to be sentenced to death. And just, we look at the world around us and all we see is death and injustice. Sometimes a source of despair is worldly oppression. There is powers in this world, and we don't have any ability to overcome them or feel like we can do anything about them. And there's a hopelessness that comes from that. And in that hopelessness, there's despair and darkness. Oftentimes, there's a collective confusion that we experience. I would say I feel like this is pretty common in our groupthink mentality and in our little tribal thought processes, the echo chambers, any other buzzword you want to throw in there to describe the ways in which we're collectively confused. These guys were experiencing that. Nobody really was understanding what was going on. The disciples were like, what's happening? And now some of the women are saying they saw an angel, and some of the guys went to the tomb and he's not there. And now here we are on this road. But it comes from this thought that death is the end. Death is not the end. And what we're experiencing is not the end because of this. Here's our right thought. The resurrection is real. The resurrection is real. It is real good, it is real true, and it is really valid for us. We keep reading the next verse, verse 25. It says, he said to them, how foolish you are and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going further. But they urged him strongly, stay with us, for it's nearly evening, the day is almost over. So he went to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And he disappeared from their sight. There's a surprise. And they asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? And they got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, it is true, the Lord is risen and he's appeared to Simon. Then the two told what had happened to them on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. Wow, what a surprise. Jesus stays with them and he takes bread and he breaks it. And they remember that he had said things like, this bread is my body, which is broken for you. It's given for you. Take and eat. And the cup, this is his blood, a new covenant, which is poured out for them. He was talking about the death he was going to experience. He's like, take and drink. And that was when they spotted him. When they recognized him, when they remembered that he said that he was going to die and that he was going to come back again. The resurrection is real. And when you know the resurrection is real, well, this does change things. Yes. They had to get back to Jerusalem in a hurry. They weren't like, man, that's really cool. When we get back there next week, we'll tell the guys. They're like, we got to tell some people about this. We got to get back and tell the gang what's happened. And they hightail it back to Jerusalem. And when they show up, everybody's together in this room and they're all talking and they're saying, and these guys walk in, they're like, guys, we don't know where you were, but listen, Jesus is risen. Simon saw him. And they're like, yeah, we did too. And he tells them this, that's the cool thing. Like he's surprising lots of people. And it's such an amazing thing when we share in this with him and we understand that the resurrection is real, that we start to understand that even while we're walking in the midst of despair, Jesus is right there walking with us. Maybe we didn't recognize him. Maybe we couldn't see him. Maybe we didn't feel his hand. Maybe we didn't hear his words. But he has never abandoned you or left you because he is for you, not against you. And he has come for you. And in the midst of all that darkness and despair, he is walking with you. And he wants you to see him. He wants you to see him. And when we see Jesus, we know he meets us where we are. He shows us who he is. And then he sends us on his way. He meets us where we are. He shows us who he is. And then he sends us on his way. Think about that. It's pretty sweet. He meets us where we are. He shows us who he is, and he sends us on his way. See, death is not the end because the resurrection is real. And because the resurrection is real, that means that Jesus has life for you, his life. Life in him. And as we go with him, now all of a sudden we start to see life in a new lens. When we understand the resurrection is real and death is not the end, well, now we can stop living like death is all there is. We can stop trying to go out and get ours and grab all we can. We can stop being so offended and having our feelings hurt all the time. We can stop making everything about ourselves. There is such a joyous freedom in going on his way, where we start to live out these radical things he said, like love your enemy. Love your enemy. Bless those who persecute you. Don't hurt them, bless them. These things that Jesus said, lay down your life, take up your cross and go follow him. He meets us where we are. He shows us who he is, and he sends us on his way. And so this is how Jesus turns the tables for us. He takes what we thought we knew and how we were trying to live, and in this surprise, he flips the whole thing and turns the tables because hope dominates despair. This is a hope. When we're sent on his way, now we have a hope in him, the life that he promises us, and hope dominates despair. The next verse, verse 36, says, while they were still talking about this, you ready? While they were still talking about this, guess what's going to happen? There's a surprise. While they were still talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, what did he say? Peace be with you. My man, I love him. Translation, don't freak out. And they were startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. And he said to them, why are you troubled? And why do doubts arise in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. A ghost doesn't have flesh and bones, as you see I have. And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and feet. And while they still did not believe it because of joy and amazement, he asked them, do you have anything to eat? And they gave him a piece of broiled fish. And he took it and ate it in their presence. And he said to them, this is what I told you while I was still with you. Everything must be fulfilled that was written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms. Then he opened their minds and they could understand the scriptures. Talk about a beautiful surprise here. Jesus shows up as they're talking about him. He's risen. No, he's really risen. They're trying to convince each other. No, really. Simon saw him. No, we saw him. No, he's really risen. We know he has. And Jesus is like, hey, guys. And he's got to do that. I mean, this is what he has to do. Don't freak out. Peace be with you. I have peace for you. And that's the thing. He's got peace for us. You see, what we tend to do is without Jesus on our own, instead of resting in his peace, we panic in the chaos. Instead of resting in his peace, we panic in the chaos and we don't know where to go and where to turn or how to live or what to do or what to think or what to say. But when Jesus is present and alive, we can now rest in his peace. Peace be with you. I want you to know this is what he's saying to you. If you have a tumultuous soul, if you're all riled up on the inside, if you feel like a wreck in here and because of the things you've done or the things done to you, he is present and he is meeting you where you are and he's showing himself to you and he's saying, peace be with you. Friend, peace be with you. You don't have to panic in the chaos anymore. Instead, you can rest in his peace. Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened. And he makes this promise. He says, I will give you rest. Rest. Man, maybe you've been going at it trying to fight this darkness. You've been going at it trying to find life in all this death. You've been going at it just worn out by despair. You've been going at it carrying the heavy burdens of the things that have happened to you or the things you've done. And Jesus is showing up right now alive because death is not the end and the resurrection is real and hope dominates despair. And he's saying, peace be with you. Peace be with you. God is for you. No matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter what's been done to you, God is for you. And he has handled all these things we've done and all these things done to us, he took care of them in his body, and they were buried with him in the tomb. Why would we dig those up? Is it because we think we need them, or because we think we're responsible for them? We can't handle them. That's why he took them. They're not ours anymore. He's handled it. And he's put them to death in his body. Let's let them stay dead with him. And now we can be with him, the resurrection and the life and the new life that he gives. And I want you to know, you matter to God. And you matter to his church. And you matter to me. And you matter. And because you matter, guess what? Everyone else, you know what? They matter. And if we could get this right, if we could start to see ourselves the way God sees us, and to know that we matter to him and he loves us this much, then maybe we could start to love others like he loved us. And maybe, just maybe, you're in for a very, very pleasant surprise this Easter. Let's listen to this song and think about how we matter to God.
No matter who you're from or what was done, you matter more to me than anything, more than anything. No matter who you're from or what was done, you matter more to me than anything, more than anything. The things we've done, things done to us, dead in the dirt, covered in dust. Why dig them up? Why dig them up? Why think we must? We know we matter, and nothing else matters. We know we matter, and nothing else matters. We know we matter, nothing else matters. We know we matter, and nothing else matters. No matter who you're from or what was done, you matter more to me than anything, more than anything.